Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the headquarters of the North American Division, where we are hosting, actually yesterday and today, the End It Now Summit on Abuse. The issues related to this problem are widespread, and the North American Division is taking the opportunity to look at this from a proactive perspective rather than a reactive one. We hope that your afternoon will be a positive, educative experience. Now I want to introduce to you Elder Ivan Williams, the Ministerial Director of the North American Division. Ivan, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Elder Jackson, and welcome everyone to the End It Now Summit. Quite frankly, from all of the time zones around our division, I really wish we did not have to have this summit. But quite frankly, we're not in heaven yet. And because we're still on earth, we still have to deal, unfortunately, with abuse. And so today you're going to hear wonderful speakers who will educate us, who will inform us. And we want to encourage you to ask questions online, from those around the conference offices to the live audience to our seminary at Andrews University. We just want to welcome everyone. And I'm going to ask our audience to stand, and if you will join me as we pray to begin this summit. Eternal God, we thank you so much that you give us tools, and you gave us a mind and a heart, and most of all, you gave us your Spirit to convict us of sin and of righteousness. We pray today that this journey will be one of enlightenment, one of encouragement, and one that will give us Holy Ghost boldness to stand for right. Bless our time today. Thank you for each viewer, each watcher, and our audience here. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you put your hands together for one of our hosts today? Let's welcome Julio Munoz.
I want to welcome everyone that's here in our audience at the headquarters of the North American Division in Columbia, Maryland. And for all of you, those of you that are joining us online, welcome to this End It Now Summit on Abuse. This is such an important topic, and I'm glad that you guys are joining us here. I see some young men here in the audience, and that's so important because it takes all of us to deal with this issue, this tragedy. It's so prevalent when 7 out of 10 women are going to be the victims of sexual and physical abuse, when 1 out of every 4 pregnant women are going to be victims of sexual and physical abuse. This is something that we have to deal with and we have to work to end now, and that is why we're here. So I want to jump right into our first presenter, and that is Elder Alex Bryant, colleague and friend. He serves as the Executive Secretary of the North American Division and is Associate Secretary of the General Conference. And Elder Bryant was ordained to the gospel ministry in 1986 and continued his education by earning his Master's of Divinity degree from Andrews University. He also received a Doctor of Ministry degree from Fuller Theological Seminary. And Elder Bryant is married to Desiree Bryant. She's the Assistant Director of Education for the North American Division, and they are the parents of 3 adult children. So Elder Bryant, welcome. The time is now yours. Please listen carefully, and please ask questions online on Facebook, and we will have a question and answer period after the presentation. Let's give him a hand and welcome him.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here with you today. I've been asked to talk specifically about a subject of policy and abuse. What does the church policy say about abuse? As the Secretary for the North American Division, one of my responsibilities is to oversee the policies, the formation of policies, the deletion of policies, the inclusion of policies for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so we want to just take a moment this afternoon to look at the policies of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as it relates to abuse. Before we get started, I want to let each person who's here, those who are watching online, know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church seeks a safe environment for all of its employees, members, volunteers, and guests in which to work, worship, and engage in the mission of the church. That the Seventh-day Adventist Church recognizes that this issue is not only in the general society, but it's an issue that we wrestle with within the church. And as you start studying when the church started paying attention to this particular issue, there were statements that were made, public statements that are seen or can be found on our website, the General Conference website, from 1995, talking about the area of abuse and that we need to give and pay attention to it. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, basic belief on how we are created informs us on this issue of abuse. That we are all created in God's image. Our church believes that every human being is created and made in the image of God. Therefore, to denigrate anyone is to denigrate God. It is against the principles of the Bible to degrade individuals through verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, any kind of abuse. And I have, as I looked online and looked in other places, there are many, many forms of abuse, but the Seventh-day Adventist Church stands against them all. Matthew 25:40 tells us that Christ takes how we treat each other, and that is the basic foundation of our attitude toward abuse, is how we treat each other reflects our treatment of Christ. Matthew 25:40 says, "And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me." So we're created in the image of God. Christ says how we treat each other, he takes it personally. So if we abuse each other, Christ said, you're abusing me. If we put each other down, Christ said, you're putting me down. And so God puts the treatment of humankind on the same level that he puts the treatment of himself. And so with that understanding, the church does not tolerate abuse in any form, physical, sexual, emotional, or mental. And you can see this reflected in our understanding of how we should treat each other. That's a basic foundation. How should we treat, as brothers and sisters, not only of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but of the world, human beings created in the image of God, how should we treat them? Our God-ordained responsibility. Our God-ordained responsibility. Our God-ordained responsibility is to protect the most vulnerable among us. And so our policies, our teachings should be done in a way that to protect the most vulnerable among us, the children, spouses, or persons in abusive relationships, employees who are in subordinate roles, such as a supervisor over a particular person that they supervise. We believe as a Seventh-day Adventist church, our responsibility is to protect those vulnerable individuals. So through three various mediums that the church uses, other than the scriptures and the spirit of prophecy, we have the church manual, we have the church policies, and we have the fundamental beliefs of the church that undergirds how we should treat each other, and it speaks against this whole idea of abuse in any form, in any way. So the North American Division policies, what are they when it comes to abuse? They include policies regarding sexual misconduct. We have very extensive policies on sexual misconduct. Policies on the process for filing complaints. If a person has a complaint about how they're being treated, we have policies on how you can file a complaint in a way that could address that particular issue. Policies that encourage organizations to make their employees, volunteers, acquainted with the process for filing complaints on abuse by its employees or volunteers. So we even have policies that tell organizations that you need to make your employees, your members, your volunteers, people who operate in your sphere, you need to acquaint them with the policy of the organization on how they should process complaints of abuse. So one of the first policies we want to review for a moment is the North American Division policy encourages congregations to adopt safeguards to protect children from physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse. That's in the working policy of the North American Division, FB 15.6. And so what the church does on a global level, on a division level, is to say to our conferences and to our local churches that there should be safeguards to protect children. And we look at children as being among that vulnerable group that we shared a little earlier. North American Division policies include abuse, FB 23.6, that reaffirms that alleged incidents of child abuse will be investigated and reported to authorities in accordance with local law. Our policies say that we do not have the right to try to determine if something is true or not. We must follow local law, which says we have to report to the authorities any allegations of misconduct when it comes to children. And that's our employees, our pastors, our teachers, anybody that works within the employment of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There's another policy, FB 22C.3, that all volunteers will be required to participate in educational courses on child abuse, physical or sexual, and the necessary steps to be taken to prevent the occurrence of child abuse incidents. And policies, just to make sure we're all on the same page on what policies are, is when the churches come together with the various leadership members, with the various members of our churches, pastors, and we come to an agreement on a particular item. When it came to this particular policy, the church came together and said, listen, we need to take this seriously, and we need to make it something that we agree to do at every level of the church for our volunteers become educated on what they need to do. Another policy is that training should include instructions on appropriate methods of physical contact to affirm children. We all come from different cultures and different backgrounds. We were raised differently in our homes. And so how we interact with each other in a physical way differs from family to family, from community to community, from group to group. And our working policy says that we should instruct our volunteers on methods of appropriate physical contact, even in affirming children. The North American Division policies also state unequivocally that a person who has been found guilty of criminal or sexual misconduct should not be employed in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let me say that again. And this is not just found guilty in a court of law. We have a process in our policies that sets up sexual misconduct committees. And that group, if that group finds a person more likely guilty or more likely innocent than, more likely guilty than not, then the policies state that that person should no longer be employed in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is a very serious matter, it's a very serious step, but the church thought it important that we send that signal to all of our members, to all of our employees, how serious we are about the issue of abuse among the Seventh-day Adventist family. And I know sometimes people, you know, we come to a situation where we say, we know this person, they're not a bad person, they've given 25, 30 years of ministry to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they should not be thrown away or cast out or terminated. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church, when we came together, we said we think that this rises to the level that this person can no longer be in employment. It doesn't mean they're bad, that they can no longer be members, but they can no longer be employed in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Our policies indicate that organizations must comply with local laws concerning abuse reporting. And I just want to go back to that. I kind of scraped across the surface of that a moment ago. But as an employer, as a pastor, if I'm a pastor, no matter what I think about that person, it could be an elder or a deacon or someone I know is very loving, very kind, but an abuse has been reported against that individual, we must comply with local laws. And so you must call the authorities. We can't leave it to the church and say, oh, the church will take care of it at the board meeting. But when it comes to child abuse, employers here in the United States, and I believe also in Canada, are mandatory reporters. So we have to do it, whether we want to or not, as a part of our responsibility and obligation. Though this is not in policy, because of the policies, the Seventh-day Adventist Church provides a whistleblower program. And one of the things about being in the church, you know, we all have different relationships. We're employer, employee, we're supervisor, and a person that reports to the supervisor. We go to church together. And it makes it very difficult then to report someone that you know, that may be a pastor, or maybe a church administrator, maybe an elder in the church. And so what the church has provided is a whistleblower program that provides some anonymity to a person that wants to report an incident that may have happened to them or to someone else. Our whistleblower program is channeled and funneled through the Office of General Counsel of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It doesn't go to an administrator in the church. It doesn't go to a pastor, but it is channeled through those means. The North American Division policies on abuse require volunteers working with children to go through background checks. It requires employees to undergo criminal and background. And here in the North American Division, not only do you undergo a criminal and background check, you also go through a sex offender check at employment. And we think that these steps are necessary to ensure a safe environment for our members and for our employees. Just another word about the whistleblower program. As the church in North America has this program, the purpose is to encourage the vulnerable to report and to identify individuals who are bringing pain to God's family. No longer do we want a person to move from church to church and from conference to conference who's been known to be a person who is an abusive person or sexually abusive to people. And so we're saying to our members, we're saying to our employees, take advantage of the silent whistle program and report that individual so that we will no longer have that individual to prey upon the members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church or anyone in a community for as that goes. The website address, I want to leave this up for a moment because this is open to anyone, the silentwhistle.com. You can go to that website address, silentwhistle.com, and then enter the word. It will ask you for the entity entry. The entity is just Adventist. Silentwhistle.com, and then you enter the word Adventist, and then it will allow you to indicate your concern, your complaint, and it will be channeled in a way that will be handled expediently and appropriately and efficiently. What can the church do more? We have, as a Seventh-day Adventist Church, many statements. We have a statement on abuse and family violence. That was crafted in 1995 and has been updated since then. We have another one on family violence. We have another one on statement on child sexual abuse. We have another one on ending violence against women and girls now. We have another one on nurture and protection of children. And we have another on a statement on just a general statement on abuse. You can find these statements, and sometimes these are not in our policies, but it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church making a public statement on our position against this particular issue. And so I believe that what we can do better or what we can do more acknowledgement of the issue. There are some in the church that do not want to accept the fact that this happens in the church. That because we're Seventh-day Adventists, we're good Christians, we love the Lord, we love Jesus, then it doesn't happen. But it does happen. And I think the more we can acknowledge that, the better off we will be. And the easier it will be to deal with it when it comes. But if we're in a state of denial and we're putting our head in the sand, then it makes it more difficult when the issue comes that elder, that pastor, that church administrator, that sister could be capable of doing something like that. The second thing I think we can do better, we need to do more of, is more effective communication of the current policies on abuse. Many of the policies I just shared, many people are not aware that they exist. And so we have to do a better job in our communication strategies to let people know that these policies exist. This is where the church stands. Another one is to be more vigilant in the training of administrators and leaders. As I read earlier from one of our policies, one of the policies is to train volunteers on how to interact, how to relate, how to deal with abuse when they see it. And I think we can do more. We certainly can do more of that. And then more public dialogue on the subject of abuse, like we're having now. And I really take my hat off to the team that put this together and that put them together last year and have been having this on their mind and have kept it before the church, because I think we need more public dialogue. We need to hit it head on and deal with it as it comes. As was stated earlier, we hate to deal with it. We hate to be talking about it, but it is here. It is among us. We see it. We have examples of it. We have situations we deal with all the time, and then we think about all the situations that are not even reported. So that's what we feel that we can do better. One of the things that I found as a person that oversees the policies is that I think that one of the things we can do to help you in learning, being more acquainted of where they are, is to try to put them all in one place. Right now, they're kind of scattered through our policy book. And so one of the things that I have pledged myself to do is to try to collect them and put them in one place in the policy book so they can be more easily found and seen and understood. That brings me to the close of my presentation this afternoon. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
Yes, good man. So we do have one question that came in from Allison on Facebook, and she is asking, are there policies in place for handling psychological and mental abuse?
No, we do not have policies that directly deal with psychological and mental abuse. We probably need to look at those. We have some processes that people have utilized, but they have not become policies. And to become policy, it has to come to the entire body and to be voted. I do know some conferences that have some processes and protocols and policies, but we do not have them at the division level, and that's something that we can add to that more list.
Yeah, it seems like there's more and more. So what would you know, there's some young men here, some might be young pastors that you would give counsel to if someone from their congregation comes up to them and says that I've been the victim of some mental abuse or psychological abuse without the policy. What's a way, like one or two quick tips?
If a person comes to you and asks for some assistance, or just say that I have had this issue, and this is not, and most pastors, we're not trained to deal with this, I would try to get help right away. I would contact my family ministries director of the conference, or if there's a person in your congregation that you know is professionally trained to handle that, I would do that. If it's been severe abuse, Adventist Risk Management has a very good team that they can help employ to help us work a person through that. I've utilized them as a pastor. I've utilized them as a conference president. I found very good support in trying to meet some issues that were really over my head as a pastor.
Well, thank you, Alex, very much. There's a lot of work to be done to change both the culture and the policies even of our church in regards to this. So thank you so much for your talk.
The North American Division is dedicated to dealing with abuse head-on. As such, there are several websites which provide resources specifically addressing numerous aspects of abuse. The Adventist Learning Community has End It Now presentations on the resource page and a continuing education course called Sexual Abuse Reclaiming Hope in the courses section. The North American Division has a dedicated website called enditnownorthamerica.org. You can find information on topics such as what pastors can do, media resources, and getting help. You can also find event information and several resources on dating violence, bullying, at-risk children, and Love Protects, healing the wounds of emotional abuse. Adventist Risk Management has extensive resources specific to abuse prevention, recognition, and reporting. This site contains NAD policy and procedures. You can visit their Child Protection page and find resources that address child protection, implementation, and reference resources. Take some time to become familiar with this wealth of resources. Make a difference in someone's life. Do the right thing. End it now.
Presenter is Rima Sukmarin. She's overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles throughout her life, failed by people she trusted, including her Adventist church community. She continued to seek healing, and despite the pain she has experienced, she continues to share her personal story in order to teach others to minister to individuals who have experienced personal trauma within the church organization. Rima is a speaker, author, and trainer who shares a riveting story from her heart. Her goal is to bring the topic of clergy abuse, often thought to be taboo, out of the darkness and speak openly to leaders so they can recognize the symptoms of unhealthy boundaries, burnout, and focus on self-care and respect. She is the proud mother of 6 growing boys and is from Ontario, Canada. Please join me in welcoming Rima.
Good afternoon. I was a little girl that always dreamed of having a happy family. I grew up in a home where my father was very abusive, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and my mom was a battered woman, and we just grew up holding our breath for the next assault or next breakout my dad would have. As a little girl, I would always pray, Jesus, after this beating, can we please be a happy family? One thing my dad blessed us with is teaching us to have a very close relationship with Jesus. And my 2 younger brothers and I, to this day, continue to have that. I believe that Jesus was my invisible friend as such an age because he was the only person I could go to when things were so bad at home or when my dad was beating us. That was a secret that just didn't come out of our house. Over a period of time, I realized that God couldn't answer that prayer because my dad had to want to change in order for God to help him. And so as I headed out through high school, I ended up going to Andrews University. I was very stressed about leaving my 2 younger brothers at home because we were very close and we always took care of each other. As I left, though, my brothers obviously grew in size, and so my father could not abuse them physically, but continued to do so emotionally and spiritually. When I was at Andrews, I discovered my freedom. Started to discover myself, and my true self grew, and I liked myself. I don't think I was allowed to really be who I was at home. Self-discovery at Andrews was really amazing. It was a time to make friends. It was a time to embrace people that normally didn't embrace us, because I grew up in a town that was predominantly white. Everybody's mother, father was a doctor, teacher, lawyer. They had the nice houses. They had normal parents, and our family was one of the few minorities, and with my dad being my dad was mentally ill, and so he was very quirky and did not have social skills. So we were a family that was never really embraced, and going away to Andrews, I didn't have that following me. I majored in education. I changed my major from business to education. And as many of you probably do in university, I dated a guy and thought he was the one. And toward the end of the school year, toward the end of my 4 years, we ended up breaking up. And so I chose to go home and do my student teaching at the academy that I had gone to. My second brother was at Walla Walla, and my youngest brother was finishing his last year at high school. And he was the youth chaplain. And the chaplain there was someone that my brother really looked up to. The chaplain there was someone that everybody admired. He was an amazing speaker. He was charismatic. He could just make you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was affectionately known as Pastor. I don't think I've really heard anyone call him by his name. And the students just embraced him. Pastor had a little boy, and oftentimes he would bring him to Vespers, Friday night programs. His wife worked in the evenings, and so it wasn't unfound for the kids to help look after his children. When I went home, I didn't really have a lot of friends left in town, and so my brother graciously allowed me to come hang out with his buddies. And I've often found myself at the academy helping with the programs and watching the chaplain's son. And eventually we ended up developing a very good friendship. He had been counseling my family, so he knew all the ins and outs, all the dirty secrets that we had behind closed doors. He knew that my dad was abusive, and he knew our home was broken. And he knew how to just bring me into that. He was very empathetic. He listened. Growing up, because I didn't have a dad that was fatherly, I always looked to pastors and teachers at these as my role models. They were so kind and loving. They acted like Jesus, and so it was very easy for me to be drawn. And pastors, of course, engaged our family, and it was just a loving relationship that I had. And so with this pastor, it was no different. I mean, I was older. I was 22. But I just felt like we were equals. And we hung out a lot. My brothers and the other students would go to his house Friday evenings and eat, have popcorn, do the things that young people do. His wife asked me to babysit a few times, and I more than willingly did so. One evening, I was babysitting his son, and he came home early. And he said, let me put my son in the bath, and I have to go away tomorrow, so I'm gonna pack, come keep me company. Nothing out of the ordinary, that was fine. And the next thing I knew, he had pushed me down, he was on top of me, and he was raping me. I begged him to stop as he had me pinned down. I told him I was a virgin and that he was hurting me. He said, I won't go in all the way. I'm not sure how I got home that night. I have no recollection of that. But I went home and I went into the bathroom. I sat down on the toilets and I looked at my panties, and there was a stain of blood on there. I don't know how long I stayed in the bathroom until my brother actually came knocking on the door, and he said, I have to use it. And I went to my bedroom and I stood there, and of course immediately I thought I should call the police. But the police were not safe to me or our family, because over the period of time, my dad, for example, one time he was beating my mom black and blue with a 2x4, and he said he was going to kill us all. And we called the police, and the police came. And while checking things out, in the end, they ended up sitting at the dining room table with my dad, and they were comparing notes about how annoying wives could be. So the police were not someone that I could call. I was really alone for the next couple of weeks. I didn't know what to do. And eventually I shared with a couple of girlfriends, but even though you're 22, I have a 22-year-old son. At 22, I thought I was mature and grown up, but at 22, you're still a kid. And when you don't have parents to turn to, it's a very lonely place when something like this happens. Eventually, I ended up going to Andrews to graduate in August. And while I was at Andrews originally, I had a group of friends, and there was this guy there, and I had the biggest crush on him. Of course, he didn't pay me any attention. He thought I was hyper, annoying, probably cute, but he might not have admitted that at the moment. And he came to my graduation, and we ended up getting together. And over that period of time, we dated for 2 years, and we got engaged, and the pastor that was going to marry us, we did marriage counseling with him. And obviously the rape was an issue between us in the sense that I had not dealt with it, I didn't know how to deal with it, and neither of us did. And so I shared with our pastor that was counseling us, and he said to me, Rima, you have to do something about this. I will help you. He asked me to call the pastor, and he said, do a tape recording of him. And so I called him. I said to him on the recording, I said, you took away my virginity without my permission or consent. He never denied it. Sorry. After that, the pastor that was helping us in marriage counseling went to the conference, went to the principal of the school, and said, this is what happened. This is what we would like to see done. And at first, the pastor denied it. And when the principal told him there was a tape recording, he admitted to it and asked what we would like. At this point, we just wanted him to stop doing this to anybody else. We asked for his ministerial license to be revoked. And at that time, I think we thought that would stop it. I mean, if he didn't have his license, then what else could he do? He hopefully couldn't go, pastor to other young people and have other victims. Now, I do know that I was not his only victim. He was a perpetrator to numerous students and other ladies. The principal and the conference did what we were asked. He drove up and he turned in his license. Before he left, the principal, I know, wrote him a glowing recommendation. He was allowed to write the community a letter in that he said that during this time when my mom had passed away, apparently she had died in this time, a young lady came into my life and she took advantage of me. And I am paying the consequence for that now. The whole community basically rallied around him. It didn't, they were very sad to lose him. I'd say 90%, 99% of them chose to go along with him and support him, despite the fact that he obviously admitted to doing something. My husband and I got married, and I went to a couple of people in the conference level and said, this is what happened, what can we do to stop him? I was, at this point, this was in the States. At this point, my husband lived in Toronto, so I moved over there when we got married. And nobody was willing to listen to me. I did go to a few people in the church, and he was coming into our town to speak at the high school. And I was desperate to stop him. And basically, the answer I got is there's nothing we can do. I'm going to fast forward to 23 years now. In that time, we had 6 kids, 6 boys, and life was great. We had our ups and downs. It's certainly not perfect, but God really blessed me in answering my prayer for a happy family. And 3 years ago, my youngest brother was the ministerial director for the BC conference, and he called me and he said, would you share your story with the pastors? From the time I was raped, my prayer to God had been to please use my pain for change, because that way the pain that I went through would not be wasted. And so I was delighted. I was scared to death. As you can see, I'm shaking up here. So I'm not naturally a public speaker, but I was very happy to share my story, hoping that it would bring out good. And I did so, and I said in that talk that in 23 years, not one person from the church reached out to me. Not one person from my church said they were sorry. Not one person from my church cared. And in that moment, the conference president at the time was Pastor Colmore. And after I finished, he stood up and he took the microphone and he came to me and he said, "You want an apology from your church? I, as a minister of the gospel, I, as a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, am sorry." And I don't know if you can imagine, but my tears started coming, because I realized that was the one thing I just needed to hear, was for someone to say they were sorry and someone to say they cared. By the end of that weekend, I would tell you that 99% of those pastors came to me and told me they were sorry. I'll tell you how many, at least 5 pastors came to me privately and told me, your story is my story, or your story is my daughter's story, or your story is my sister's story. At that moment, my life really did change. At that moment of hearing, I'm sorry, healing started to happen. And I have to give credit to the Canadian Union Conference because they have just gone above and beyond. They have been a true example of what God wants our church to be. And they offered me counseling. This did not happen anywhere in their territory, but they offered me counseling. They continue to pay for it. It's been 2.5 years since I've had counseling and continue to do so. And I'm a totally different person. The healing that happens and is continuing to happen is phenomenal. I love my church. It means everything to me, but I love Jesus even more. And you know, our church, it is broken in many ways. And it makes me so proud to stand here and talk to you and be part of this mission for prevention, and yet at the same time for reaching out to victims that have really been hurt and forgotten. The Canadian Union also invited me to speak on the course that they were talking about for the Adventist Learning Center. Sorry, the name has left me. But my story is on there, and I have received so many letters from people that have thanked me saying, you are telling my story. I'm so proud that the time is to end it now. I'm proud that God has given me courage to be a voice to people that do not have the voice to talk. And God answered a little girl's prayer and blessed me with a happy family. Yeah, there you go. This is my gift from God. He took a broken heart. He took a girl with broken heart. Thank you. He took a little girl's prayer. It took him a long time to answer it, but the answers are coming now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your courage and your bravery to stand here today, because nobody would blame you if you hadn't, right? That's the truth. The easy thing to do would have been to keep it to yourself, but I can guarantee that somebody in this room and somebody watching was just empowered because of you. Thank you.
The Sexual Abuse Reclaiming Hope course on the Adventist Learning Community sets a new standard in training. This course delivers reliable information about abuse prevention, abuse detection, reporting criteria and responsibilities, and the process of healing. There is a path back to wellness for a church, school, or family where abuse has taken place. But we need to start talking about it. In addition, this course contains several victim impact statements, which include actions taken after the abuse took place. While they may be difficult to hear, these situations may shed light on the potential existing abuse in your community. This course provides an opportunity for you, your church or school leadership and its employees, and your church families to get educated about sexual abuse. This course will provide the tools necessary to do the right thing. There is a path to navigate challenging abusive situations. You are not alone. Take the End It Now course and get the tools you need to make a difference in your community.
And it's my privilege to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Kate Ott. Dr. Kate Ott is Associate Professor of Christian Social Ethics at Drew Theological School and lecturer in Practical Theology at Yale Divinity School, where she is the lead instructor for ministerial boundary training. Kate is trainer for Faith Trust Institute, presenting workshops and courses on youth and young adults. She is the author of Sex and the Seminary, Preparing Ministers for Sexual Health and Justice, Sex plus Faith, Talking to Your Children from Birth to Adolescence, and the forthcoming Christian Ethics for a Digital Society. So Dr. Kate Ott, the time is yours. Welcome. Let's welcome her.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. As you can tell, I'm one of the outsiders for the conversation that we're having, but I'm certainly an insider to conversations about sexual abuse, harassment, and assault prevention across faith communities. It's an honor to work with any faith community that is invested in ending abuse now. This is necessary work. This is important work. As we've seen from Rima's story, this is courageous work. This is also sacred work. We need to look at least 3 things, and today you're hearing about all of those in a variety of ways. We need recognition that, in fact, there is a problem. It's not just out there, someone else's problem, but it's in our churches. We need prevention. We need to take steps, both through policies, but also in our everyday practices. Policy means nothing if we don't choose to live it and enact it in the churches in which we serve. And lastly, because we know with as much recognition as we might have, as much prevention as we might put in place, we may still need to intervene. Abuse will still happen. So let's look at each of these. As we think about recognition, abuse is an epidemic. It's an epidemic that affects people regardless of race, age, nationality, religion, economic status, or educational status. That means in every faith community, in every location, abuse can be happening. Recognition is also about breaking the silence. It's about truth-telling, hearing each other's stories, as we just did. As we uncover the facts, we have been spurred on culturally, especially in the United States and then also globally, by the Me Too movement. One of the things that the Me Too movement has tried to raise awareness about is that sexual assault, harassment, and abuse is personal, it's routine, and it is epidemic. Every 2 minutes, someone in the United States is sexually assaulted. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 33 men in the United States will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. College-age women, right? Rima's story is not unique, and it is sad that it is not unique. College-age women are 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than women in the general population. 73% of rape victims know their assailant. When it comes to child sexual abuse in the United States, 90% of children know their assailant, and 68% of those abusers are family members. Sexual abuse, harassment, and assault is indeed personal, routine, and epidemic. Now, the Me Too movement has also spurred on the Church Too movement. In some evangelical circles, the hashtag silence is not spiritual has been gaining ascendancy, and you all have End It Now. Is that a hashtag as well? All right. So awareness and recognition are happening, but we need more than hashtags. We need action. Clergy sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse are extremely underreported. Some reports we do have with regard to Protestant congregations The Baylor University Social Work School did a study in 2008 of 3,500 congregants, and they found that in average-sized congregations, their average was about 400. That might change on which denomination you're talking about when you talk about averages. But about a 400-member congregation, 32 people on average have experienced clergy sexual misconduct. 92% of those advances were made in secret, and over 65% of those advances were made by someone who's married. When it comes to child sexual abuse statistics, that is even more difficult to find. In the mid-2000s, 3 insurance companies that insure Protestant congregations came together to release the data they had, to at least raise what awareness they could. They came together, the policies they had of over 160,000 congregations, they reported that there were close to 8,000 insurance claims filed between 1987 and 2007. Now remember, those are only complaints that rise to the level of being reported and going through insurance claims. So how many more cases are there? Sexual abuse, assault, and harassment is personal, it's routine, and it's epidemic. The impact of ignoring boundary issues allows for the victimization and the exploitation of the vulnerable. It breeds mistrust and secrecy, it erodes faith, and it ignores the foundational principles of our faith communities. Take Rachel's story, for example. Rachel's parents are out of town. She's an older high school student, so responsible. They know she can take care of herself. Her young, well-liked youth minister knows her parents are away and volunteers to give her a ride home. As he pulls up in front of her home, he reaches over as she begins to unbuckle her seatbelt, grabs her hand, places it in his crotch, grabs her breast with the other hand, looks directly in her eyes and says, "I have been praying. God made you for me." Tears well up in her eyes. She pulls her hand back as quickly as possible, fumbles with the seatbelt, gets out of the car door not knowing how, runs into the house, and locks all the doors. Alone, she wonders, who will believe me? Was it my fault? Does God really want me to be with him? And in those moments, if he has said he prayed for it, can I turn to prayer? Ignoring boundary issues exploits the vulnerable. It breeds mistrust and secrecy, it erodes faith, and it ignores the foundational principles of our faith community related to care, justice, and respect. So then what is the purpose of boundaries? Healthy boundaries allow for the flourishing of communities. It helps us acknowledge our limitations, and it puts a check on our responsibilities. Boundaries help us ensure safety and protect the vulnerable, to build trust, to ensure appropriateness of role, whether that be the ministerial role, church staff, building staff, volunteers, or laity. We all have roles to fulfill in our faith communities. It helps us respect others from different cultures with different levels of comfort with touch. Recognizing those differences helps us see where someone's boundary is so that we don't violate it in everyday interactions, just like saying hello to someone, how we touch them, how we acknowledge them. It also helps us build healthy faith communities. Now, in order for us to have healthy boundaries, we need to think about what happens when it comes to issues of power. Too often in our faith communities, boundaries are thought of as negative or restrictive. Perhaps you've been in that committee meeting where someone says, oh, we can't have that rule about 2 adults with the children all the time. We don't have enough adults, right? Or what about those times when we just want them to feel free? Or, well, I know it's a good thing for me to be able to take the kids home if they need a ride. Yes, those are all good things, and when the person is well-intentioned, harm does not happen. But when the person is not well-intentioned, harm occurs. So having those boundaries is not a negative thing, it's actually a positive. It helps us see the way in which we can create communities that flourish. It helps us to rebalance the power in different relationships. We know that all of us are susceptible to crossing boundaries. When our own needs aren't met, when we are not self-reflective, when we don't realize the resources or power we have, we can often violate another person's boundaries. And we know that individuals who have less resources and have less power are susceptible to being harmed. So let's think about the example of Nichelle. Nichelle has been in a marriage now for 2.5 years, and she's come to the point where she can no longer handle the explosive behavior of her husband. She makes an appointment with the pastoral care staff member at her church. She goes to meet with him. She explains what's been going on in her household. She talks about her husband's explosive behavior, her fear of him. She shares specific incidents of physical abuse and emotional abuse. He listens patiently, intently. And when she is done and looks at him directly and says, "What should I do?" He leans forward in his chair, takes both his hands and begins to caress her shoulders. He looks at her and says, "I think the real problem is that you're not satisfying your husband. He needs a release for his energy. It's part of your duty as a wife to be a calm to his storm." Nichelle is confused and feeling more vulnerable than when she first went in. He makes her promise that she will come back and tell him exactly what she does to help satisfy her husband, and if it makes a difference. Too often, in cases of abuse and neglect, we can use our theology to protect the abuser and not spur us to end the abuse. It is, in fact, about power. In that relationship, there are different roles, there are different resources and different powers. Now, in all different roles, whether it's being an employee or being a church volunteer or being a ministerial staff, we have different power relationships. We navigate those every day. Most of us do so in healthy ways. But we must recognize, both with our policies and our practices, that it is common workplace practice to acknowledge the vulnerable in those kinds of power differentials. Think of teachers and students, doctors and patients, counselors and clients, faith leaders and congregants. Those are all invested with differing levels of power, and we must acknowledge that in the way in which we do our work. Yes, perhaps we are all called by God. We all are in the image of God. But once we take on different roles, once we gain certain educational status or ordained ministry, we take on a different level of power in that relationship, and we must be responsible to that power. Now, in communities We often mitigate those power differentials by putting policies and practices into place, many of which you heard about in the first presentation today. And so we'll move through those. As we think about safe congregations, what do they prioritize? Safe congregations prioritize abuse prevention policies and practices for staff and all volunteers. In fact, in one of the faith communities I was recently a part of, they voted that everyone in the church would get trained. Didn't matter if all they did was show up to worship services. They wanted to know that every person in their faith community was aware of abuse and abuse prevention and knew that it was their responsibility. Now, these practices and policies are often specific and especially intentional about children and youth, given their vulnerable status in our faith communities. It also means that we have to pay attention to building use and security issues. Think about how many incidents of clergy sexual misconduct happen in secrecy. How do our policies about building use and the spaces in which we counsel perhaps afford individuals secrecy, when in fact they should be about holding individuals accountable? We also need education. We need sexuality education and abuse prevention education. Not just once a year, but throughout our congregants' lives. Our older adults, our parents, our children and youth, everyone needs this education to be on the same page with each other, to be committed. These three initiatives happen in faith communities. They are successful in faith communities because of a shared responsibility between clergy and laity, and a shared responsibility among the laity. Right? This can't just be one person's responsibility. It can't just be the staff's responsibility. We're all called to care for the most vulnerable in our midst. That means we are all responsible. So as we think about those shared responsibility for boundaries, congregations are workplaces and they are communities. That makes them unique when we think about abuse, harassment, and assault prevention. As workplaces, congregations are employers. We can't get away from the professionalization of our communities. We should embrace it. Congregations are also communities, so that means we are not just worried about thinking through the policies and the training that our staff need, but what do our volunteers need? What do all the laity need? What do all the children need, right? We have to think about the full community as we bring forward these kinds of education. Just as a standard, when we think about faith communities as a workplace, in the United States, most workplaces are required to follow the Equal Employment Opportunity Protection laws. These laws work to prevent against discrimination, against harassment, and sexual harassment in particular. They ensure fair pay, equal treatment, and safety. These practices and policies also, when you have the law, you have to have a way to show that your employees know what the law is, right? That they know how to file a complaint. So there is always workplace harassment training that is accompanied with that. That training is not just for employees to feel safe or to know how to file a complaint, but that training is also about the institution. Right? It's also to protect the institution, to say, we are doing what we can in the circumstances in which we can to prevent this. Now, religious institutions are not exempt from these secular laws, and we shouldn't be. In fact, we should want higher standards. Right? We are communities of care, of trust, of respect, of justice. We should be saying the law doesn't go far enough. What else can we do? We know, however, no matter what we do, that in fact, past abuses have happened and future abuses may still happen. So that requires that we are clear about what will happen when we need to intervene. Ministerial violations of boundaries violate fiduciary responsibility of the professional role of the minister. They are a misuse of power and authority. They take advantage of the vulnerable. They are, by definition, the absence of meaningful consent because of the power differential. And from my point of view, probably the worst violation is the spiritual harm and the breach of sacred trust that ministerial violations commit. So Marcus and John, middle-aged guys, meeting up for their annual guys' weekend. They've been friends since elementary school, and they have pledged that once a year, they'll get together in some metropolitan area where they want to see a baseball game, a football game, a basketball game. They are excited. They look forward to this every year. They're in their hotel, coffee's in hand, settled in, sitting in the lobby, catching up on the last year. And in the background, the news is flashing. Marcus abruptly changes the conversation and says to John, "You know, all of this reporting recently about the Catholic Church and historical abuses has got me thinking." John, confused by the change in direction in the conversation, says, "Why?" And Marcus proceeds to tell him what so far he has only told his wife, but that throughout their childhood, Marcus was abused by their minister. This went on from early elementary school, where it was not as severe in terms of abuse. The minister was grooming him. And time went by, and Marcus felt he couldn't tell anyone because he never told anyone when it first happened. He thought it would stop. John is shocked. This was his best friend. How could he not have known for all those years? Marcus talks about how diligent he was to keep it a secret, how ashamed he was, how much the entire congregation loved the minister. The community loved him. No one would have believed Marcus. And Marcus then says, "I know we've fought about this before, John, and I've never told you, but this is why when we got to college, I just stopped going to church altogether. How could I be part of a community? How could I be part of a religion? A group of people who believe things but allow that to happen to a child? So I just never went back." And John says, "What do you want to do now? I'll stand by you, whatever it is." When we think of ministerial violations of boundaries, yes, it's a violation of their professional role, a misuse of power and authority, taking advantage of the vulnerable, an absence of meaningful consent. But it is, in fact, a spiritual harm, a breach of sacred trust. Whoa, sorry, I killed something. No, I didn't. Check that out. Thank you for the power of magic. In fact, in faith communities, we have the moral responsibility and the capacity to respond justly and fairly. We can do this. Sometimes it's difficult for us because we know the abuser. We might be biased because we think we know everything about them and therefore they couldn't have done this. So sometimes our biases stand in our way of following through on a complaint. But in fact, the integrity of the ministerial relationship and of our religious institutions is at stake. We can do this. We can end it now. At Faith Trust, we walk with faith communities to be an outside companion for them, to help them in case bias becomes a roadblock. We help them to follow through on the policies and practices you already have, that you have committed to. And we suggest that intervention needs to be based in justice making. It is about truth-telling, allowing the victim to tell their story, both privately and communally if they choose. It is about acknowledging the violation, naming the violation as misconduct. It is about compassion. Compassion means to suffer with, not to try to fix the past violation. It's about protecting the vulnerable, about making sure this doesn't happen again. Most victim survivors who come forward for that reason. Please don't let this happen to someone else. It's about accountability. Accountability is required for someone to repent. It is required for metanoia, for a transformation away from sin. It is about restitution. The costs of sexual abuse, of any abuse, are emotional, can be physical, can be spiritual, but also can be financial. Medical services and counseling is not cheap. That is the responsibility of the institution who allowed the violation to happen. And lastly, vindication. Not out of revenge, but vindication means to set free so healing can happen. So what do we need? We are called to recognize the image of God in each person, to treat all with dignity and respect. Harassment, abuse, and assault is a sin against our neighbor. It is a sin against God. We must come together by recognizing our role, by understanding the power inherent in that role, and taking responsibility for appropriate use of power. As we build these healthy faith communities, we need to hold ourselves, our clergy, and our clients responsible, our congregants responsible for faithful and appropriate relationships. Support victims of harassment in our communities, create trainings, policies, and educational opportunities to explore these issues. I want to also say, if you have them all, we have to take advantage of them. Creating them is not enough. We need to use them. And we need to do this work before crises happen in our communities. At Faith Trust Institute, we want to join you in that work. Thank you.
Thank you for that all-important and engaging presentation. We have a question from Facebook. And so Isabel says, I have found that the problem is that no one, in all caps, is holding the perpetrator accountable because the perpetrators are pastors or elders in the church. So, what do you do when the leaders can not only cover up the behavior, but persuade the personnel or the executive committees to which they report in our church not to take the complaint seriously? What are the options then for a lay member?
Yeah, so I can speak more generally, but and if I'm wrong, specific to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, please correct me. But what I heard this morning was that the silent whistleblower process is meant to be put in place to remove that level of perhaps insider, of protecting the insider for abuse. So in those cases where our faith communities choose to protect themselves and choose to protect their institutions out of fear, the wider denomination has made available another route that someone can take. I will say, as much as our policies are wonderful, as an ethics professor, I tell everyone that policy is ethics in writing. Yes. We need to make it ethics in action.
Yes.
So how we respond to those complaints, we may in fact as faith communities also need lay outside-led committees because that shared responsibility can't just be within the hierarchy and within the clergy, but that shared responsibility has to be with the laity, and we need to empower them to make decisions when the laity, in fact, cannot hold itself responsible.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kate Ott.
Hi, my name is Jack. I'm 13 and in 8th grade.
My name is Kate. I'm 13 and I'm in the 8th grade.
Well, I'm in National Honor Society.
So am I. I'm a starter on the volleyball varsity team.
Well, I'm a starter on the varsity basketball team. And I'm in the drama club.
To be or not to be?
Is that a question?
I'm a victim of sexual abuse.
So am I.
Our next presenter is Nestor Bruno. He is an ordained minister and licensed counselor. He has served in the South American, Trans-European, and North American divisions, providing support to the ministerial family. He is the director of the Kettering Ministry Care Line, and with his team provides online counseling to almost 5,000 ministerial families of 44 organizations. Nestor, thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. First thing I would like to say is that we believe in a God that is not in the accident, but in the ambulance. I don't know if you went to the newspapers this morning, you turned on the TV, but the first thing I saw, I cannot believe that what we are doing is so relevant. I saw something about a judge that is being nominated for the Supreme Court, and I also saw something about a comedian that I heard that is extremely famous here in the States, being condemned. So this couldn't be more relevant to the society and to the moment we are living. And I'm so proud that we are here as a church addressing this topic openly. So proud. And we have a God that is part of solving this problem. He's running in this ambulance, and he's trying to join with other people that want to jump in this ambulance so we can go and be part of the solution. You might remember a text which is in Proverbs chapter 24, verse 16. It says that the righteous falls 7 times, but rise again. Which is interesting is that it says that the righteous falls. So we are talking about a righteous person that is falling, going through something difficult. How many of you know the Psalms 23? And the ones who are at home, how many of you know it? The Lord is... And we can go on, probably the whole thing. Verse number 4, it says, when I walk through... So it's saying, when I walk through. It's not saying, when I stand there, and I sit down, and get so comfortable in the valley of shadows. No, 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 no. When I walk through, I'm leaving that place. My place is in the house of the Lord. My place is by still waters and green pastures. I'm not staying here. I'm passing by. So when we want to help someone that has been abused or has been through so much, we have to keep in mind that God wanted us to move forward. We are part of that journey, and they are going to move from point A to point B. They are not going to stay in the valley. That's not their place. But it's interesting that people that have chosen God, Jesus, as their shepherd, do they go through valleys? My goodness, they do. They do. The righteous falls, and Proverbs says that rise again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. 7 means normally the number we use for God. So many times, God, it's fantastic how He can turn problems into blessings. He has been doing that for thousands of years, and He has done it in your lives, I'm sure, and in mine. Why this ball bounces back? Any reasons? The ones who are at home here, any reasons why it bounced back? Hello? Are you here? Yeah. It was created for that, designed for that. Any other reasons? We have one already. It's made of rubber. There you go. Another reason? Force. So we have said a few good reasons. There is another one that I will add. It has air inside, doesn't it? If it doesn't have air, if it loses the air inside, it will bounce less and less. So the air is very important. In the Bible, the word air it's also very important. In Hebrew is ruach. Can you say that? Can you say that at home? Ruach. So we can warm up our tongues. In the New Testament is pneuma, or pneuma. In English we say pneuma. Okay? It means air, and it means also what? The Spirit. Presence of God, the Holy Spirit. We bounce back because the Spirit is present. Once and again and again and again, we bounce back. And sometimes difficulties are so bad that we bounce higher and higher. Can I ask you, Ramon, to help me for a second? Let's take a couple of stories from the Bible. Here, Ramon will help me. Can you stand here like 2 steps right there? Thank you so much, Ramon. You remember Joseph, for example? It says that when Pharaoh looked at Joseph, he said, this person has the spirit of the holy gods. Do you remember that? Genesis chapter 41. Now, he was hated by his brothers. You remember? He was sold as a slave. So he was sold as a slave. There we go. And after being sold as a slave, he ended up in Potiphar's house. And he went up. But then he was harassed by Potiphar's wife. You remember that? And then he went to prison. And after prison, he went to the throne. So God used all the abuse and all the trauma that Joseph went through to move him to a better place. Do you think that God was behind the harassment that he suffered by Potiphar's wife? God wanted him to be in prison? Had God wanted him to become a slave? No, never. But God was trying to be part of the solution and moving him to a better situation, just like with Daniel. Daniel was a teenager when he was taken to Babylon. You remember that. Many commentators said that Daniel lost his gonads and he became a eunuch. So imagine that, being a teenager and becoming a eunuch. Is that sexual abuse? He was a slave. He was a couple of times almost going to die. You remember the den of lions? But after the den of lions, again, moved to a better position, a new position. Thank you, Ramon. And sit over here because I'll call you in a second again. So we are so passionate about the God we have that He will use people to help us when we are in prison, when we are slaves, when we have been harassed, abused. And we can be that people. We can be part of God's kingdom on this earth. So I'm saying this spiritual introduction, because we believe in all we do with my colleagues at Ministry Care Services, in what we do supporting pastors and their families, and through them their congregations. We believe that a psychology has to be based on a scripture. And the way we help, it has to be based on God and scripture. Now, what about helping families, people that have been through this? How can we be part of the solution and not the problem? And here again, our friend Ramon will help us. Thank you, Ramon. Now we are trying to be part of the solution. Here is Ramon, and I will represent his past. When someone has been through a lot, through abuse, their past, it's kind of heavy. You see? Yeah, very heavy. And they try to be present. They try to be in the present. But all of a sudden, they are here listening to this presentation, or at home listening, and something comes back from the past. And they want to be in the present, but they can't. And they try to balance, and they use a lot of energy so they can stay there. But the past is fighting, you see? It's kind of heavy. So when we are trying to help someone that has a heavy past, we all do, by the way, we all do. We need to remember that they want to be present, but at some point they will go back. You remember Joseph? He went through a lot. Now he was on the throne. He was successful. He proved in his life God's presence. You remember when he met his brothers? He cried. He had to go away. So he was there, very present. Everything was going well, and then his past again, bothering him. So when we are helping someone, we have to remember that the past will be coming back at any point, trying to pull them, and that's okay. Because at that point, we want to say, no, stay here. Don't go there. It's okay. Take this, napkin and don't cry. At that point, maybe what we can do is just hold their hand, and if they are afraid, let's walk with them, wherever they go. So if Ramon moves, I will move with him. I will go there. He's not moving, so I'm staying. Okay? So we are just going to be there, present with it. Thank you so much. Thank you. How can we be present? By the way, did you notice the meaning of this beautiful word we have in English? Present? What's another meaning of present? Gift. Gift. Look at your hand for a second. 1 month ago, all your palm was completely different. All the atoms in your hand changed in 1 month. You, and you can Google this is amazing. All of you, 2 years ago, all your atoms were different. All of them. Every 2 years, all your atoms in your body are changed. Why am I saying this? You are a new model. You are the 2018 model of yourself. Yeah. The 2016 doesn't exist anymore, and this model won't exist in 2020. Because that's the gift we have. The gift of the present. We are here. And I'm saying this because we need to remember that, especially when we deal with people that have been through a lot. They can connect to the new version of themselves. They don't need to be there at that old version, and they need us to connect with that because we are the present. We are here with them. We can go with them wherever they need to go, where they are afraid to go, we can go together and we can listen to them. Many times when we are listening to someone who has been through abuse and things like that, trauma, we get very uncomfortable because we don't know what to say. And we actually wanna fix it, make them feel better. Let us remember at those moments that our need is not the most important at that moment. Isn't it so? It's their need. And if they need to go there and say this and that, let's go with them. Relax your shoulders, be present, and listen. Many times if we don't know what to say, sometimes we can just say, you know, I don't know even what to say after what you told me, but I'm so honored that you are telling me. I'm so honored. And just keep listening. We don't need to have the solution. We don't need to have the intervention that will make them feel better, but we need to be present. And if they feel we are connected, we are there, present, it's probable that that struggle will end up somewhere here when we are connecting. Did you think that when someone shares with you something they went through, something terrible that happened to them, they already went through a healing process? The moment they are talking to you and they have chosen you, that's a healing moment that didn't start with what they are saying. They looked at you, they somehow got to trust you, which is something very difficult for someone that has been through a lot, but they already trust you, and they are telling you this. So there is already a healing process taking place. Just let it grow. And we let it grow listening, being present, not trying to fix things or say, well, you know, it's a common mistake. We say, well, at least what? At least you are alive, at least you are a good person. There are no at least that can help, but we can be there, we can be present. There are stories that we tell ourselves that are true but are not good. So I am not a depression. I am not a bipolar disorder. I am not a traumatized person. I am much more than that. Aren't you? Much more. But we can tell those stories to ourselves, and we get to a point that we start believing. And maybe the story is true, but it's not good. It's only maybe part of the truth, or it's just I'm focusing on part of that story. So we can be there present with the ones that have been through a lot, helping to tell a new story. They will do that if we are present. Because something that we have to realize is that people that have been through abuse, they have done so many things after being abused. I mean, positive things. I remember this client, and I asked her permission to tell her story without saying her name. She's not from this denomination, but she grew up as a believer. Her dad was all the time abusing her sexually, and she had 2 siblings, and he was abusing them physically. She grew up, and she became a pastor herself and married someone that had a sexual addiction. But in the midst of all of this, her own abuse, many problems in their marriage, she became a lawyer. She finished school, became a lawyer, and she's a very successful lawyer. And I can tell you so much more. She's a wonderful person, a leader, a woman that is full of courage. How did she do that? So you see, we are not unabused We are not a depression. We are so much more than that. And when we are connecting with someone that has been through abuse, being part of the solution is helping them to realize they are so much more than what happened. Many times we can look at someone and say, wow, how did you do it? I mean, becoming a lawyer, being a wonderful mom, being a pastor. Tell me more about that. How did you do it? And they can tell us about how did they overcome, and they were resilient, and they bounced back once and again. One last thing. And at home, you can stand up for this, but here we will just stay on our seats, in our seats. Leave everything you have in your hands, and please do as I tell you, okay? Ready? Relax your shoulders, put your hands on your sides, and try to relax a little bit. Take a deep breath. Good. Now lift up one arm, just like that. Point with one finger. Make some circles. Quicker, quicker. And now put your finger on your chin. Where is your finger? On your chin or on your cheek? For the ones who are at home, many are laughing here. So why the majority of us was confused or end up with a finger on your cheek? Because you were looking at me. So what is more powerful, what we do or what we say? What we do. What we do. Brené Brown, she says, love when preached and professed is beautiful, but it's powerful when practiced. Love is powerful when practiced. And what we do is what matters. Being part of this conference, we have so many resources online. If someone comes to us and wants to be helped and we don't know what to do, we can start therapy ourselves and get good counsel if we want to be part of the solution. The thing is to put our love in action. And I think this conference is part of that. So love when practiced, very powerful. I hope that God, when He's passing through with the ambulance and invites you, I hope that we can jump in. And we all here, we can be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nestor, for that presentation. Our next speaker is Krista Blakeney Mitchell, and she is the Associate Director at the U.S. Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women and has been with that department for 23 years. She has served as a grant policy subject matter expert for improving justice system response in case of intimate partner violence, and currently manages the Rural Sexual Assault, Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, and Stalking Program, and the Improving Criminal Justice Responses to Sexual Assault and Stalking Program at the Office of Violence Against Women. Ms. Blakeney Mitchell received her law degree from Howard University and obtained her BA from the University of Washington. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here. I feel like I'm the outsider with insider privileges. Working with the Department of Justice, looking at this issue from the federal level, but also being a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church for many years. You know, we make jokes about being born into the church. I'm one of those. So today, I really wanted to take time to talk to you all about the responsibility the church has to recognize and address domestic violence when it is suspected amongst our congregation, in our schools. There have been times when silence, minimizing violence, victim blaming has happened within our church community, which has been unfortunate. But there are other times that I'd like to bring to light where there are opportunities for us to leave that past behind. And what I've seen since I've been here today and what resources that you all offer, I see you're all definitely on that road. But we have something to offer as well from the federal level. But I want to start with a little story about the deacon board. The deacons in our church, in my church, are like no other. There's a brotherhood, a camaraderie. They're very sharp, they're very athletic. They have that Mission Impossible cool. And I'm talking about the old Mission Impossible with, Peter Graves. And there was one deacon, however, who was abusing his wife. And when their abuse would occur, she would call upon the deacons. She would call them and plead for help. A select few would come to her home to intervene. There are many times they took him and walked him around the block to cool off. On one occasion, when she called, things had gotten really, really bad. And so when the deacons got there, they saw the situation and they took matters in their own hands. They decided at that point, you are leaving this house. They packed him up, made sure he had everything personal that belonged to him for no reason for return. They didn't just put him out on the street. What they did was one of them took them in their home. And he stayed with them, and they made sure he got some type of counseling, some type of help. They had no legal duty to do this, but yet they were accountable of one of their own who did not fit the mold anymore because of the conduct that he was engaged in. So I'm going to come back to that story, and I want to go through some statistics that you may be familiar with through this conference, but just want to kind of set the stage here. So what do we know about domestic violence today? We know that 1 in 4 women suffer abuse, some sort of abuse. It could be sexual, it could be purely domestic violence. 1 in 5 women on campuses are sexually abused. 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year. Immigrant women and children are 2 times more likely to experience domestic violence than the general population. The average age of abuse, domestic violence abuse in particular, is between the ages of 18 and 34. And in looking at the worldwide stats, the numbers jump a little bit. 1 in 3 women worldwide experience physical or sexual abuse from the intimate partner. So what does all this mean? These statistics tell us that in your line of work, the likelihood of you encountering someone who has been abused, who is being abused, or someone who is exposed to abuse in the home, that 1 in 4, that 1 in 3, that 1 in 5, that's who you are encountering. I want to read a quote from Rabbi David Rose. He says, as clergy, we often are aware of the violence of families experience, but not always aware of how we can best intervene and provide support, and even whether we are required by law to take further steps. Rabbi Rose hits on three important factors in this quote here: intervening, providing support, and legal responsibility. These are questions that we all should be asking ourselves. So let's take a look first at legal responsibility. Legal responsibility comes under mandatory reporting. What is mandatory reporting? Who is required to report? A mandatory reporter is someone whose professional job, their professional position, makes them obligated to report any suspected abuse. Mandatory reporters are expected to recognize, respond, and report. Now, state laws and local laws are very clear when it comes to mandatory reporting of child abuse, elder abuse, abuse of the disabled. It's very clear that generally those folks are first responders. First responders are law enforcement, could be firefighters, could be military, emergency personnel in the hospital, emergency technicians that come to the home. And it even goes even further when you're looking at child abuse and elder abuse. Teachers, counselors are first responders, but they're also mandatory reporters. However, when it comes to domestic violence, the law is not quite so clear, or it's not consistent. In some states, they have designated healthcare professionals as designated mandatory reporters. In other jurisdictions, it's silent. It doesn't say. So sometimes it's up to the organizations to implement policies to designate who is a mandatory reporter when there is suspicion of domestic violence. So I say all that to say is that you may or may not be a mandatory reporter. If the state law doesn't require you to do so, then you need to check with your organization to see whether or not you fall in that category. However, despite all that, accountability as Christians, as fellow believers, that's what really matters here. So regardless of whether you're a mandatory reporter, you're accountable for your brother, your sister. And so I want to just share with you my thoughts on what accountability means. Accountability means being informed. Know your limitations. Providing ongoing support and making a difference. And accountability when it comes to community, it's acknowledging that sometimes, or in the past, there might have been an error in ignoring a cry for help or abusive tactics or activities. Minimizing or blaming victims for the violence they have experienced. It's an opportunity to change how you respond. And we've seen that when communities take on a mission of accountability, progress is imminent. There are many slogans of accountability campaigns, The bullying stand up, speak out has been very successful. See something, say something is a common nomenclature. Haven't seen this one in a while, but back in the day, they used to say, friends don't let friends drive drunk. You'd see that all over the place, billboards. So we're not expecting you all to have all the answers, but know what you know. So if you know that there's a domestic violence hotline, there's a national hotline where victims can get help, know that number. Memorize it. Keep a card in your pocket. Be ready and able to assist. If you know that there are victim services in your community, then also know the people who operate those services. Make a contact with someone within the service so that if something dire happens and you find yourself in the middle, you have somebody that you can talk to who has experience in advocacy, in crisis, in prevention, and intervention. Also, I think it's important to understand that accountability is not easy. We have to step out of our comfort zone sometimes. My husband had a friend in another state. He was a pastor, and his secretary was being abused. And when he found out that this was happening in conversations, he said, well, do you know what the local resources are? Have you tried to get her help? And they said, well, no one will help her. And my husband came to me and said, why won't they help her? Why can't she get the services that she needed? Well, it turns out her abuser was a live-in mate. They were not married, they were cohabitating. And the laws in this state regarding family violence and resources and assistance require that you had to be married in order to receive assistance. So when he found that out, and knowing that she was willing to relocate, my husband helped her pack up and bring her 2 boys, and she was expecting at the time as well, and move to another state that offered services no matter what your status was. She was able to get the legal assistance that she needed, the counseling that she needed. He was under no legal obligation to assist. She had other members of her church family. But sometimes it's going to take that extra step. Like I said, we're not expected to have all the answers. And just like the deacons and that deacon board, back then, that was over 20, 25 years ago, they didn't have the resources that we have today. They didn't have the training. They didn't have the education. But what they did was they had the will to respond, meet the needs of the person who was calling upon them, and they weren't afraid to take action. So I want to share with you, I know you all mentioned some of the resources that you all have, and I think that's awesome that you have taken upon yourself to provide your own resources. But we have resources too, from looking at a national level with the Department of Justice. The mission of my office is to provide federal leadership in developing the national capacity to reduce violence against women, and in particular, providing support to strengthen services for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. This may be a little bit fine print for you all to read, but just want to show you each state and territory annually receives funding from the Department of Justice to address domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So the smallest state receives about $2 million, and it goes all the way up to $42 million that are dedicated to support services across the country. So our annual appropriation for domestic violence and sexual assault and stalking is about $300 million. So if you think about that, all this money that's out there to support services, to support activities and initiatives to reduce crimes against women. Since 2014, we have funded about 50 faith-based organizations. 50. Maybe a little over 50. So we have resources. In addition to the training and online resources, we have funding that can help support special initiatives within your church, within your conference. Of those 50, here's just a few who are funding right now with Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, Lutheran Social Services, the YWCA, and several colleges and universities. We have had the privilege to actually support 2 Seventh-day Adventist projects. One in the state of Washington through our Sister's House, which provides advocacy and shelter for victims of domestic violence. Also in Pisgah, Florida, there's a church there, and they have been receiving funding to train church members under a ministry to be advocates within their church, to provide assistance to victims of domestic violence, to be a confidential, safe environment for reporting. There's also another church, actually not too far from here, who decided that even without federal funding, we're going to do something. And what they did was they started their own domestic hotline. And in doing that, they brought in national trainers to train their congregation. So not just to how to command the hotline, but understand the purpose of the hotline and how it was going to help empower victims to get the assistance that they needed, to move on with their lives and to leave the abuse behind. They have been very successful in this venture. In fact, they've inspired other churches to look to see how it can be what they're doing can be replicated in other communities. In addition, there are other resources on a national level. And I think it's great to have in-house resources. But on a national level, you also get a lot of the cutting edge techniques, strategies for addressing this issue. And a lot of them are issue specific. Here are a few. Break the Cycle works with teens. The ABA has a commission on domestic violence that deals with legal issues. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, there's a state coalition in each state on domestic violence and sexual assault. The National Coalition knows who they all are and their points of contact. But at your state level, the coalitions can tell you about the services in your community. You can talk to them about what are they doing with the faith-based community. And I also encourage you having a seat at the table, because the coalition is made up of people just like you who care about this issue and want to do something about it. Community accountability, specifically when it's in the church. It's going that extra mile. We know we have a moral responsibility. We know we have a God-fearing responsibility. But in addition to that, we have a responsibility to try to make this world a better place. And if we truly believe in doing that, it's not worrying about whether you're a mandatory reporter or not. Mandatory reporter is recognize, respond, and report, and you're done. Accountability can be a lifetime commitment. But I know that with our fear and admonition of the Lord, that we can make a difference. And through this End It Now campaign, it's a message to the church community and to the world that you're willing to take the task, take up the responsibility of being accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. We have a question from Facebook. Valens wants to know that some victims do not want to talk to or face people who have abused them. At some point, is it necessary for victims to face the person who has abused them?
That's a good question. If there is going to be some criminal charges that come out of the abuse, then there is a chance that if they're going to testify in the case, then they may have to face their abuser. If it's a civil matter, not necessarily, because you get the order of protection and they're served, and the service can be done without the presence of the victim.
Okay, and initially, they should not feel that they have to alone take them on, like before a legal process has started, correct? To find an advocate or someone to help them out, a victim?
No, definitely not. One of the things that we've seen in practice is that a victim who is ready to have a separation or depart from the relationship that they're in, from that point on, there are advocates, as you mentioned, there's counseling, there's other things that puts that buffer between any communication or confrontation with the batterer.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do and for your presentation and for sharing with us. Thank you so much.
The Adventist Learning Community houses thousands of standalone resources on the resources page. To navigate to resources, scroll down the home page of the ALC until you see the faces that represent the different audiences. Click on the one that represents you. Let's click on Pastors and Chaplains. You will be directed to a resource page with thousands of resources clustered under different icons. Click on the icon that interests you and view the resources in that area. Let's click on the End It Now icon. This is where dozens of presentations from multiple End It Now events are located. Simply scroll through the presentations to see which one you would like to view. Share these resources with your church members and peers. To report content viewed on the resources page of the ALC, simply follow the ALC self-report process.
Our next presenter is David Fournier. He is the Vice President and Chief Client Care Officer for Adventist Risk Management, and he is specifically responsible for assessing and implementing the delivery of products and service programs for all products of the company. He's responsible for the risk control and education programs of ARM, and he's been with them since 2004. David, thanks for joining us today.
The case took place 15 years ago. The scenario is that this young lady, a young girl, had lost her father. So now her mother is single, doing her best, but this young girl is grieving. She is in a vulnerable place in her life at that time. The Sabbath school teacher became aware of what was taking place, of the vulnerability, some might call it the opportunity, and abuse took place in that child's life. You fast forward 15 years, the claim comes in as the young lady finally shares this information with her pastor. Here's what happened to me 15 years ago. And the pastor, feeling deeply that something must be done, something must be said, reaches out to the conference. The conference asks him, please speak with Adventist Risk Management right away. They need to know what's going on. So we get a call. One of our team of attorneys takes the phone call and guides the pastor through the process. Lets him know this must be reported to the authorities. So he does that, guides him through that. In many cases, Adventist Risk Management will actually provide counseling services immediately, even before a case starts, to get this person on a journey of recovery. But a claim is eventually filed by the family, a settlement reached, money's paid out. But what happens next? What happens to this young lady? If you think about it, she's probably struggling with some serious issues, anxiety. There may be sexual dysfunction going on in her life. She needs help. She needs care. Spiritually, what is taking place in her life? She may be dealing with a real challenge of connection with certainly the pastor, Sabbath school leaders. Her church in general may not feel like a safe place due to the experience that she's had. How do you minister? How do you relate to such an individual? We've heard some amazing stories today, some great analogies. This person is carrying a weight from the past wherever she goes. Sometimes we take these things on ourselves and feel as though because we feel so deeply about this person's injury, we have to take it all on ourselves. So we go and we don't know what to say, but we say something. We want to show care. We want to reestablish for her a connection with our Father in heaven. Is everyone here feeling equipped and ready to engage in that conversation, provide that kind of guidance? Sometimes I feel as though in our community, we can be a little bit too insular in that we will often take some of these things on ourselves when outside expertise would be much, much more effective and appropriate. So I would encourage you to reach out to your community, as was mentioned in the previous presentation. Find out what are the resources in this area. You know, there are places like, we saw so many examples, but I think of the House of Ruth. These are places where you can go and look for people specialized in working with these injured parties. I'm going to share with you some information. This information comes from a loss analysis we did between April 2008 and April 2018. Adventist Risk Management provides insurance for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I'm speaking from our experience. Now I have to qualify this just a little bit and say we don't provide this insurance for every single entity. Some of the entities actually purchase their insurance elsewhere. But I'm overall, and certainly for the greater majority of the entities here in the North American Division, do purchase this insurance from us. I will also say that our team does very well in this area. They understand the mission of the church. They understand that when an individual has been harmed, we want that person restored to our family, right? These numbers are also only what has been submitted as a claim to Adventist Risk Management. So most of this, or all of this, is going to be of a certain nature. Those claims where the church had a responsibility and somebody reached out to the church as an organization and made a claim. As somebody alluded to earlier, that doesn't mean that there aren't other hurting people out there. In fact, I would suggest there usually are quite a bit more people out there than we would know about from certainly these numbers. So let me share with you what we're dealing with over the last 10 years. Just about $11 million in claims paid in this area. This is about 168 claims represented in those dollar figures, and of those, about 35 are still open, okay? Which means that just under $11 million number will probably creep up just over $11 million as those claims are all finally closed, okay? It's easy to look at these numbers and think, as a numbers guy, about how very large that figure is, and to think how much better it would have been if those dollars could be put to use in the ministries of making someone's life better, right? I hope you agree with me that our dollars would be ideally spent in engaging in ministry with people, introducing them to Jesus Christ. But these are not just dollars spent, and they're certainly not dollars misspent. Because these numbers, both the claim count and the dollars, represent individual lives. These are people who have been injured, who have been hurt, and in some ways permanently, and in some ways irreparably. So I like to look at those numbers and remind myself that they represent very real individuals with traumatic experiences. And they're not just individuals because they have families. And the family is often very hurt as well. And how that family then relates to the church family matters a great deal. It's not the only piece. There's also the person who did the offending, the perpetrator. That person, their relationship with the church family should have changed. I hope you'll agree. But that individual also has a family, and their relationship with our church is likely changed as well. How we navigate the process of working through the fallout of these kinds of incidents is important. And it's important, and I hope you'll agree with me that it is most important how we relate to the hurt individual most of all. So let's look. I like to use the analogy that when we're talking, whether you're a Sabbath school leader, a Pathfinder leader, a pastor, a church administrator, a teacher, whomever you may be, whatever role you may have, whether you don't have maybe one of those labels and roles, think as a leader. Preventing child abuse starts with leadership. It starts with being willing to be unpopular and make hard decisions. It means standing up and implementing processes and following the policies, whether everyone is on board with you or not. That's a difficult thing to do. And you may be amazed at some of the resistance you may at times experience. As you lead, you have a duty to protect in any role. Our church has a duty. I'm going to talk about what that means a little bit more in just a moment. But as we think about that duty, we have, particularly with children, as they come into our Sabbath schools, as they attend our Pathfinder clubs, we have now been given by the parent care, custody, and control, which is what creates that duty. And the last thing on this, I would like to remind you, you represent something so much larger than yourself. And I'm not just talking about the fact that if you're a Pathfinder leader or a pastor, you represent your Pathfinder club or your local congregation. You represent the organization that you're a part of. And in many cases, that's going to be at the conference level. And the way our church is organized, it has a structure to it. And it's important for us to understand what that structure is and how it works, because that's where you will receive the guidance and the policies of how to navigate these processes. I would take it much, much further. You represent the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. You represent Christians in a world that is less and less friendly to Christians. You represent not Christianity just as a religion. You represent Jesus Christ as a person. So why is this important? For many of you, I believe most of you, overwhelmingly, and if in doubt, I hope you'll side with me on this, you are a mandated reporter. It's important because we want to protect our people before something happens. And this is an area of deep and significant legal liability. Some of our attorneys, I counsel with them regularly, certainly before they let me get up and speak in public. And they tell me, in regards to these types of cases, the trend is that we get in trouble not so much for what we do, it's for what we didn't do. Right? The church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the individuals that are gathered at this summit, we don't go about plans to cause anyone harm at any point. So how does the church get in trouble from time to time? We get in trouble for what we didn't do. So let's think about this for a little bit. We'll talk about our legal duty in just a moment. That'll be next. But let's remember that the church is not entirely limited to the legal process. And I'm speaking specifically here. Let me explain. I have the question from time to time, what do we do? We reported this individual, this incident, and this abuser, this perpetrator, to the authorities, and they were unsuccessful in prosecuting a case. Or maybe they didn't even take the case. They did nothing. I heard of one recently. Well, this case, they didn't pursue it at all. They can't make a case of it. And it's difficult to put a case together in this area. So what is the church to do? Because now we're sitting here with the great known. The gossip mill is working furiously. We all know what happened, or we think we do. How do we navigate those moments? Does the person simply get to wave this flag of, I was not convicted, I'm untouchable? And that's not the case. Our church has the opportunity to move through a due process internally, to navigate an internal decision of how are we going to relate to the people that attend our congregation? Do we, going through a due process, understand that this person represents a significant enough risk that we are going to make decisions about their participation? After all, this is our church, and we do get to decide who attends. I think it's important for us to be aware that we have these tools and we can move through those processes. While as the risk manager, I encourage you to move through those processes very carefully and cautiously. Doing nothing is not a good alternative. Because too often what we, the church, are accused of and where we lose our reputation is for all of the things we didn't say, the things we didn't do, the results we never achieved. We can do better than that. Let's look at negligence. Negligence is the failure to have accomplished something. If we think of the story of the young lady who was abused by the Sabbath school teacher, let's look at the pieces of negligence and see how it applies to that case. First of all, there has to be a duty, okay? So our young lady has been given by her mother to the Sabbath school teacher at Sabbath school time, given into their care, custody, and control, right? So do we have a duty to provide a safe environment? Do we have a duty to provide adequate supervision? I see some nodding heads, not nearly enough. This is not a trick question, it's an easy one. Do we have a duty? Okay, the next piece is, did we breach the duty? Well, clearly, the young lady was abused, so very, very easy to see that something certainly went wrong. Usually, the thing that went wrong is adequate and qualified supervision. There's a breach of that duty. Damages. Did something bad actually happen? Okay, something bad absolutely did happen in this case. And causation. Is there a direct connection between the breach of the duty and the damages that took place? So just because somebody has been hurt in an unrelated way, obviously doesn't mean that there was a breach of, that the damage was related to that. But in this case, absolutely the damage that resulted was a result of the duty that was breached. Does this little formula make sense? Yeah. So this is a basic description of our legal duty, of negligence, of how we tend to go wrong when we go wrong. I would say that our legal duty is the very bare minimum. Certainly, as we're regarded in our society today, people look to the church as an organization that says, we understand where moral authority comes from, and so they look at us and say, then you should do better. You should do better than the basic, than the bottom. So what do we look at as sort of that next step up in the scale of from a legal duty? What's the next piece up? I think it's ethics. I think ethics is very closely related to the legal system and law. I think that's fantastic. But ethics, what is ethics? Ethics is essentially the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's not complicated. We learned that one on the playground as kids. Well, he has 3 trucks. I have to have 3 trucks too. Absolutely. We're going to fight about it until it's fair. That's what fairness is. Jesus had some fantastic things to say on the topic. He talks about both the law and ethics. You have heard it said, you shall not murder. This is from Matthew 5. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. In fact, he goes, if you read the whole chapter, these are just a few of the examples. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. There's that ethical component. Let's make this fair. Did Jesus leave it there? Wow, no. Later in the chapter, you've heard it said, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, because that makes sense. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Wow, that's not natural. That you may be children of your Father in heaven. And I hope you're wondering right now, Dave, who are you referring to as you use this quote on this topic as the enemy? I hope that's the question you're asking. Because too often, the enemy becomes the person who has the case against the church. And that's where the relationship is broken. And that's who we're in conflict with. And so we don't know what to say around them. And we don't know how to welcome them into the sanctuary. We don't know what to do because we really like the guy they're accusing, or lady, whomever. And our loyalties are struggling. But Jesus said, love your enemy. What does that mean? Same concept in John 13, 34 to 35. And I think this one is more articulate and punchy. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. And I know this is a simple answer to an extremely complex question, a difficult one. But it's a matter of priority, and it's a matter of human relationship. And if we can't get this one figured out and know how to relate to each other, and particularly somebody who is hurting the most, I think we will have missed the greatest of opportunities. Last year at this event, we had a speaker by the name of Mark Chopko. He's an attorney. He's worked with a number of denominations in this field, defending those organizations in cases of sexual abuse. And his quote from him was, "The church does well when it acts like the church." And we do. When we remember where our priorities are, when we remember that to behave as our Father in heaven, as Jesus Christ has instructed us to do. So I would like to tell you that when Adventist Risk Management's legal team works on a case and it comes to a settlement, writes a check, that all is better and all is well. But I'm painfully aware that we are, to be a bit crass, suits in DC. And it's just numbers on a check. And often that is not everything that somebody needs to be restored to whole in our family, in our community. They need us to learn how to relate to them, and we can do that. We can spend the time gathering like we have, learning more about this issue, making it a priority in our schools to understand how to relate to this going forward. If there's one thing we can do, it must be done together, because that's the only answer that will make the best possible outcome for those who've experienced these terrible losses. Let's end it now together.
Thank you, David. Have a question here from April on Facebook. She says, how can conferences enforce child protection training and screening in local churches who are not willing to participate in verified volunteer or similar programs?
That's a question I hear regularly, and I wish I had a better answer for it, because I think at the end of the day, it comes down to a question of leadership, which is a very personal and human quality. Being willing to stand up and stand firm that this is what we will do, that the outcome is worth whatever stress may be involved in making this happen. It takes standing firm.
So we don't mandate that a church participate in a verified volunteer program or similar program?
We do, and I believe Elder Bryant spoke to policy this earlier as we got started, and certainly policy does speak to this and does make it a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And now our next presenter is Tony Anobile. Tony is currently the North American Division Vice President for Multilingual Ministries. Tony served as a conference president, I think, in the Grand Canyon state of Arizona for about 8 years. It's close to the promised land of Southern California, where the magic number is 5. But Tony, in his time there, has always been a strong advocate for all church leaders to not just know the NAD policies regarding abuse, but to apply them to protect their church members. So this is a very important presentation. Tony, welcome, and time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Julio. Dave and I didn't get together, but we might as well have gotten together on the topic. And I think refer to the question that was asked, because they have asked me today to give an administrator's perspective based on an experience that I had when I was as president. So let me just tell you my story. Before I do that, I guess by introduction, I need you to know that I was a conference president. I was a youth director. And I understood the importance of protection, because, you know, you're a youth director, you're working with camps, and I know there are camp leaders that are here that I've said hi to. So I understood the value and the need to protect everybody, not just kids, but everybody. But I did not comprehend the profound significance of knowing all policies, of the absolute necessity of applying and implementing policies. And you've heard that a lot today, but I want to just emphasize that again. It's not just knowing the policies, all the policies. It's applying, implementing the policies, and then the trauma of being deposed. And that's really what I'm here to talk about. And I thought, you know, is that a strong word? No, I was traumatized. And at the end of my presentation, I'll tell you what our attorney told me to tell you regarding that. So here's my story. While I was president, a terrible situation occurred at one of our churches, and it was that a deacon who allegedly sexually abused a very young child while the child should have been under the care of the parents at the church. In other words, the official activity had ended. The child should have been with the parent, and an alleged sexual abuse took place. Well, the pastor did the right thing. The first thing he did was call our ARM director at the conference. And the conference ARM director, Adventist Risk Management Director, called the division Risk Management Director. And that's always what we need to do, because they will start a file, they'll open a case in the event that something happens and that it's necessary. So the pastor did the exact correct thing. He called ARM, ARM called the division, and we were then ready in the event, as you'll see later, that did happen, that the case progressed. Of course, they called me, and we cooperated fully and completely with all the legal law enforcement agencies and with ARM. We didn't hide anything. We didn't try to protect. In fact, our attorney met and we went through exactly what we were going to do and how open we were going to be to make sure that everybody was protected. Yesterday at the Spanish seminar, it was an interesting comment made by the attorney. They said, do we protect the victim or the organization? And he followed that by saying, when you protect the victim, you are protecting the organization. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And when we do our part to make sure that we are doing the best we can to protect everybody, that's when we can have the best outcome. I'll share later, nobody wins when sexual abuse takes place. So it's not about winning or losing, but we can have a better outcome if we in fact try to work together. Since the situation occurred at the church, a lawsuit was filed against the local pastor, the conference, the local church and the conference. And you know, if you've never gone through that experience, let me tell you, when you get a legal document with your name on it that says you're being sued, the fear of God is placed in you. And that's what happened to me. So as the investigation progressed, I was informed that the pastor and I would be deposed by the attorneys representing the family. So when we got that information, our attorney came and met with me and said, now let me prepare you as best as possible for the deposition. And what he told me was, you need to be very aware of the questions you're being asked. And I guess a parenthesis, a pause. The reason why I'm presenting this is because if you don't think it's ever going to happen to you, I would challenge you to think again, because it probably will. And as much as I thought I was prepared, and even in the position I had in the conference, nothing prepares you for a deposition. But he tried, and he said, now listen, the other side, the attorneys for the family, they're going to try to make you feel comfortable, try to make you feel relaxed, like they're your friends, so that when the questions really start getting difficult, you're just kind of let things go and share things maybe that you wouldn't normally share if you weren't paying attention. So he said, try to answer yes or no. Now, if you have to expand, go ahead. Be honest always, but really pay close attention. Well, this is similar to what where I was taken. You see the camera, the computers, and that already kind of freaks you out. Then in my case, their attorneys were on the left side, my attorney was on the right, and I was sitting on the hot seat there in the back. And sure enough, when the deposition started, it was like this. I was happy. And they started. They said, now, I don't know much about the Adventist church, but you people love the Lord, right? And I go, yeah, we love the Lord, of course. And from what I gather, you're very health conscious, and right? Yeah, we are. And would you say that in general, you love? Yeah. And my attorney goes, can we have a pause, please? And he took me to another room, and he didn't slap me upside the head, but he might as well have. He said, what are you doing? You're doing exactly what I told you not to do. They're getting you ready, acting like they're your friend. Pay attention. Well, from there, it went to this, and you really can't see it very good, but that girl has a terrified look on her face. And that's how I was from that moment on. And kind of the somber expressions that you see, that's about how it was. The deposition took 6 hours with no break. No meal break, nothing. We had water bottles, that was it. As the deposition progressed, and I started really paying attention to what was going on, the enormity of what I was going through really put a sense of fear and concern as I realized that every question I was asked, every answer I gave affected the church, the conference, and me. And 6 hours of grueling questions that, in my opinion, were brutal, rough, and sad. Questions like, is it okay for a child to be abused? Well, my answer, of course not. So your church is guilty then? Well, my attorney had told me what to say because we had discussed this issue that the child should have been with the parent, but my answer was the alleged unfortunate incident occurred after any official meeting had ended and the child was under the care of the parents. Oh, so it's okay then. As long as they're supposed to be with the parents, abuse is okay, right? No. So your church is guilty, right? And on and on. Finally, our attorney, after what seemed an eternity, said, asked and answered, move on. Well, after the deposition, well, before that, as we got in, they specifically asked me about policies. And I want to say right here that I am grateful as a conference president at the time for the policies of the North American Division. They are great policies, and I'm not going to have you raise your hand. How many of you know the policies by memory? Because I didn't, but let me tell you, had it not been for the policies that North American Division had in place regarding care and how to relate to children and what to do and who can work with kids, this case for the church would have been a disaster, would have ended in a terrible way. But because there were policies in place, and because the church, the local church, was following those policies, that's what ultimately helped the conference, even though, as I said, in these kinds of cases, nobody wins. Well, after the deposition was over, I had a major headache. That's not an exaggeration. Some had to do because I didn't eat, and I'll admit that. But the attorney could tell I was shaken, and this is what he said to me. Now you know why I emphasize the importance of knowing and enforcing policies. Well, let me tell you, my perspective changed forever. And at every workers' meeting after that, I always included an item on knowing and applying enforcing policy. A little bit later, we'll talk about how that can help you. Well, the case was settled, and again, what saved the local church, the conference, and the church at large were the policies that the NAD had in place. So what are the lessons that I learned going through this process as an administrator? Well, no one wins when abuse takes place. Many lives are affected, often with permanent consequences. As Dave said, we may be able to write a check for a certain amount of money, but the damage is permanent. And I praise the Lord, as you've heard here already, that God heals, but scars remain. The days of, we'll take care of this ourselves, are over. And I have talked to pastors that said, well, don't worry about it. I'm not going to do anything. A couple examples. And maybe I'll give you the next one and then come back to the examples. We are required mandatory reporters. Now, yesterday we learned, it was interesting, I didn't know this, but states are different. So every state is different, but the majority, and they showed us, the majority of the states in this country require clergy to be a mandatory reporter. Whether you want to know or not about the situation, the minute you know, you are required to do something about it. I had a pastor that came to me and he said, a mother just came and said that she thinks her husband is abusing one of their daughters. What do I do? I said, call CPS right now. And he goes, well, what? I don't want to. I go, and not only that, now that you told me, now I'm in trouble. So either you call or I call, but someone's going to call. Well, he called. The mother was upset. How could you do that? I wasn't sure. I was asking for advice, but how could you do that? The pastor came to me. Why did you make me do that? I said, well, first of all, because you're required to. Second of all, because it was a right thing to do. 6 months later, the mother came to the pastor with tears in her eyes and said, Pastor, it wasn't just one daughter, it was all three. Thank you. Another individual, an employee of the conference, in a non-church activity, allegedly abused the granddaughter of the owner of the house. The parents call the police. They do what they need to do. I write a letter immediately as a president. You're on a paid administrative leave pending an investigation. From this point forward, you're to have no communication with kids. You're not to be around kids. And if you come to a church or an activity, you have to be supervised. The family of the young lady, the grandmother, was denied it. There's no way. I know this person. He's a leader. He's a good guy. This could never happen. We wrote the letter, put it in the file. I left, I took another position, I wasn't president. 2 years later, 3 more cases were reported. The law enforcement agencies came to the conference office and asked, did you know about this? They handed in the letter. This is what was done as soon as we found out in 2015. The conference was okay because we had taken action. The person has fled the country. He's a fugitive somewhere. If they ever catch him, he'll have to face the law here in the United States. The point is, folks, it's what we've already heard, and we've been repeating this all day, and this is the value of this summit. We can no longer just sit and do nothing. And somebody said, well, but we report. That's right, we report. Law agencies do their job. CPS does their job. Summer camp, I was camp pastor. Counselor comes and says, Pastor Tony, one of my campers just told me that his dad abuses him. What should I do? Same thing. We got to call CPS. Deer in the headlights. I don't want to. Well, I don't want to either. But it's either you or me because now I'm involved. We called CPS. They took over the investigation and they determined whether or not it was a legitimate complaint. Our job, our duty, if we think abuse has taken place, is to report it. And it is uncomfortable. And sometimes it puts us at odds with people, but I would rather do that and know that I've done my job and have a clear conscience than try to look the other way and not do anything. And of course, as an administrator, not only that, but the legal ramifications, of course, play in. Okay, so here they are in red. Folks, know what the policies are. Know them. Know what the NAD, conference, and church policies are regarding safety, particularly child safety. Implement the policies. Use them so that abuse can be avoided. And I know we live in a world of sin, and that is true. We've heard it already here today. But you know what? If we do the best we can avoid abuse in many cases if we're aware and if we plan and if we know what to do. So, administrators at all levels, talk about this issue with your leaders and members as a whole. There are many great resources. You've seen them today. This is going to be online. You can go if you didn't get a chance to write them all down. This whole seminar will be online. You can read them, find what they are. But there are individuals who are available to come to your conferences, churches, schools, camps, to train and prepare your people, to know what to look for to avoid abuse. We had one individual that worked with law enforcement. She was phenomenal, a non-Adventist person. Came first and did a presentation at workers' meeting and put the fear of God into all of us. Then I brought her for the teachers, and then we brought her to do for the training for the lay people as a whole. Now, the reason I say it is because there was a fee. We had to pay for her to come. But that investment, compared to what a lawsuit would cost, you can't even compare. Not only that, but to mention the trauma that we may have avoided by having our people ready to know what to look for in an abuser. And we talked, you know, it was about grooming, and it was everything. There are excellent individuals that can come and help your people, your leaders, your church members know what to look for and what to do to avoid abuse. So in conclusion, our attorney said to me, every administrator and leader should be deposed at least once to know they never want to go through it again. Unfortunately, like with anything else, until you go through it, you don't sometimes give the importance you should. So while I understood what he was telling me, I hope none of you ever have to be deposed. But if you do, you will know and appreciate that you have taken precautions to make sure that everything possible had been done to avoid abuse. Let's work together to protect everyone. Let's know the policies, implement the policies, and friends, may God grant us his protection until the day that Jesus makes all things new, and that day's coming, praise the Lord. And we won't ever have to worry about abuse in any form ever again. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Thank you, Tony. We have a couple questions for you. Cheryl, who is a chaplain, wants to know, how does the church plan to address the abuse endured by many female pastors?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, you mean physical? What abuse is she talking about?
I would think maybe emotional abuse, probably in light of... Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. The North American Division has been very proactive. In fact, I think, Julio, you're aware that 2 weeks ago, I think, in the West Coast, they had a convention or conference for all female clergy. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the North American Division is extremely supportive of and wants to help all of our women clergy. And I would say if there is this issue of emotional abuse, and you're probably right that that's what they're referring to, they can certainly notify us, women's ministry here at the division. I know that the unions are open to that as well, but we will do everything we can, and we are continuing to implement policies and initiatives, even funding, to continue to help our women clergy, because we're the priesthood of all believers, and we need all hands on deck to finish this work.
Absolutely. Second question, Beverly wants to know, what programs are there for families of guilty persons, so maybe the perpetrators? They are often treated as the guilty even though they weren't involved.
Well, that's a good question as well. And again, I would say, and if you listen to Dave, in many cases, when we go through mediation or even settle, we allow or add additional funding for counseling for all the families involved. I know that as conference president, we made sure that everybody that needed it received it, and we've put a considerable amount of funding into allowing for counseling on both sides until, at such a time as we felt they had received or they told us that they were doing better. So those kinds of things are available. It's probably going to be on a more case-by-case basis, but most conferences that I've been involved with are very open to helping make sure that everybody receives the help that they need.
Well, thank you very much, Tony, again. Yes,
I said I was going to answer the last question from from Dave's presentation. It is conference by conference. I will tell you that when I was president, we did require everybody to go through verified volunteers. And I had our HR director give me a weekly update of all of our employees that had not yet gone through the training. And I would send out emails on a regular basis saying, hey, you need to finish this, you need to sign up. And I think that most conferences are doing that, but until, as leaders, we realize the importance. So I guess in my conference, if you weren't willing to do that, even you as a Sabbath school leader,
right,
I would love you, but you couldn't work with kids.
Right, without doing
unless you went through, which is really an easy process. It's not complicated at all. Right. And but that was at least what we did, and I think more and more we all realize that we need to do everything we can to protect everybody.
Well, we need more leaders like that in the church. Thank you, Tony. Right.
The North American Division is committed to ending and preventing every kind of abuse. To help raise awareness for this important issue, we've launched a website, enditnownorthamerica.org, dedicated to educating our leadership and members to help break the cycle of abuse. This site features resources dedicated to equipping pastors and members. It provides the necessary training to help them prevent abuse, identify and assist victims, as well as navigate the legal and spiritual consequences of these difficult situations, empowering you to help the helpless in our churches and communities. Please visit enditnownorthamerica.org today to download free educational brochures, watch instructional videos, and access domestic violence hotlines, where professionals are waiting to minister to and guide victims. It's time we talk about abuse. It's in our communities and it's in our churches. Follow us on Facebook or Twitter by searching our handle @EndItNowNAD for information, testimonies, and details on how you can get involved. Let's get the conversation started. Use #EndItNowNAD to become a part of this collective movement and spread awareness within your sphere of digital influence. We have the opportunity to make a difference. We can End It Now. Join us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, Erica, it's been almost 9 years since I was privileged to be part of the team that launched End It Now as a campaign. Time has really flown by, but I know that this event in particular, it's taken a whole team to put this together, but I want to say thank you to you for your passion in keeping End It Now going as a campaign and your leadership in putting this summit together and with End It Now in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Julio. It's been a privilege, and I want to let everyone watching online and here in our studio audience know that this is an annual event. You've heard it said several times, NAD is committed to ending this problem. This is an annual event, the Summit on Abuse, different presenters, different topics every year, because we know that it's not just hearing it once. We have to be reminded, and there's always new information coming out. So I want to remind you to visit enditnownorthamerica.org. We have free resources there available in English and in Spanish. We ship those to you absolutely no cost. We'll provide enough for your entire church if you're interested. Also follow our Facebook page for the latest resources and updates. One of the most recent updates to our website, you can now go on and find help wherever you are. If you need immediate assistance, you can put your zip code in and find all of the available resources in your area. We're very excited to be able to offer that to you. So just stay on the website, on our Facebook page, to make sure that you're keeping up with everything that we have to offer.
Because we need every single person that's here and that's watching us. It's going to take all of us because we really want to end it now. We're done. So.
Want to invite our NAD Family Ministries Director, Claudio Consuegra, to end this summit with a word of prayer.
Let's have prayer. Father God, we thank you for the time that we have spent together. It's not something we enjoy talking about, and I wish we wouldn't have to. And yet, it's part of our life today. For those who are in ministry, I pray that this information will awaken in them the reality that it's happening in their congregations, and that they can be instruments of peace and instruments of healing to those who are suffering. To those who are preparing for the ministry, may this reality also be clear in their minds, that while they will have to talk about Greek and Hebrew and Bible and all those wonderful things, they too will have to address this at one time or another. But I pray, Father, that the message to all of us will be, the gospel of salvation includes putting an end to the suffering of the victims of domestic, physical, sexual abuse. So I pray, Father, that when we focus on our ministry, we focus on the victims to try to bring healing and to bring an end to their suffering. And at some point in time, we also have to think about the batterers, the abusers. They too need Jesus Christ. We want to put an end to all of it, not just to the victimization, but to the control that takes place. And so, Father, we commit ourselves to be your agents to end it now on behalf of your most vulnerable children. We thank you, Father, for bringing us here, and pray for your blessings on all of us in everything that we do. In the name of Jesus, amen. Amen.